Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Adriana Galvan. I'm the co-executive director of the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescent. I'm also a professor of psychology at UCLA. And this is our second annual Love and Adolescence themed webinar. And we're super excited today to talk about a very hot topic, which is about romantic breakups. And I know a lot of us have had personal experience with that, so we'll get into that in just a little bit. But just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. We have 4 outstanding panelists, and they will each speak a little bit during the webinar, and we'll leave some time for questions at the end, about 15 minutes. And you can ask your questions through the Q&A function throughout the discussion, and we'll be sure to get to them towards the end. We'll be recording this panel discussion and have it available on our website after the session. So if you miss any part of it, you can always go back. Okay, so why did we decide to do a webinar on breakups? We know that during the adolescent years, social relationships, including romantic relationships, are really wonderful opportunity and time for learning and development in many different domains. Experiences of attraction, of desire, of love and loss can all help us learn how to nurture intimate relationships throughout our lives, not just during adolescence, of course. And we also know, and many of us remember from our personal experiences, that the feelings that accompany these social relationships can be quite intense, starting with the euphoria of falling in love to the heartbreak of breaking up. And in fact, the breakups are a very common cause why young people seek out counseling and support from others, especially after the first breakup. And so today we're going to talk about these relationships during adolescence with a focus on breakups. We'll discuss why these relationships matter, how they help our young people learn about social relationships, and how we can support them if they're undergoing an experience of loss. I'm joined by a wonderful panel today. They'll each introduce themselves, or they'll each say a little bit about themselves after I introduce them. The first is Dr. Nicole Green. She's the Executive Director of Counseling and Psychological Services at UCLA. Dr. Anna Suleiman, she's an assistant professor in the Department of Public Health at Sacramento State University. She's also the coordinator of the Youth National Scientific Council here at the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescent. We also have 2 members of our first Youth National Scientific Council, Michaela Dawkins, who is a junior at the University of Connecticut, who is majoring in gender, sexuality, and global reproductive health. And Tomi Dugbo, who is a senior at Brooks College Prep. And I'm excited to have you all here. So Nicole, we'll start with you. If you can say a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, all. Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Galvan. Again, my name is Nicole Green. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a psychologist by training. I'm from the LA area. I am the executive director of our counseling center here at UCLA, which is home to 45,000 students. I also oversee a gamut of mental health resources, including our Resilience Center, which focuses on positive health and well-being, as well as our sexual violence prevention and education program and our crisis services for students. So my interest and investment in helping folks to become their best selves is really my interest and passion. College age is a perfect time to do this. People are finding their career paths, their independence, their personal paths, and really thinking about how to make themselves a productive and whole well-being. So whole well person. So thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Okay, Michaela.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. As stated, I currently attend the University of Connecticut, majoring in gender, sexuality, and global reproductive health, but I also am minoring in human development and family science. In my free time, I am a human development enthusiast, and I am in love with behavioral health science. And I'm just so happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, thank you. Tomi?
Hello, everyone. As stated before, my name is Tomi Dubo. I'm currently a senior at Brooks College Prep on the south side of Chicago. And as going through my senior year, I hope to major in, for next year in college, I hope to major in either communications or public relations and media. So yeah, I'm just really excited to be here. And I use she, her pronouns.
Thank you. Anna?
Hi there, I'm Anna Suleiman and I use she, her pronouns. And in addition to being a faculty member at Sac State, I really focus my research on how we can use what we know about adolescent development to improve their lives and well-being. And I'm very committed to working in partnership with young people to create change in their lives so that they can shape the world to be the future that they want it to be. So that's what I'm interested in. I started out in public health, really interested in romantic and sexual relationships. And the more that I think about them, I realize that those social relationships are central to how we exist in the world. And so I've gotten a much broader stance in just looking at adolescent health and well-being overall.
Thank you. Okay, so now that we've met our panelists, let's get into some of these great questions. So we drafted a few before, but of course we'll answer those that come in from the audience as well. Maybe Anna, I'll start with you. So you and I have had a lot of discussions about how the beginnings and endings of relationships, romantic and also close friends, can evoke really strong feelings throughout our lives. But why are these feelings particularly intense during the adolescent years?
I think that this is a really interesting question. And if we think about this from an evolutionary perspective or a neurobiological perspective, the primary purpose of puberty is for young people to be able to successfully mate with one another. And this has taken on many different meanings socially, but I think that it adds a new dimension to relationships that didn't exist before in childhood. So suddenly you have these feelings of attraction, of sexual attraction, of physical attraction that you didn't feel before when you were building relationships with people. And that dynamic of the physical relationship, that physical component. And we see this both in platonic relationships with adolescents as well as in their friendships. They become much more touchy and huggy, and they're wanting to have that physical component to their relationships, regardless of what the label is for that relationship. And so whether they're designated to be in an intimate partnership or not, there's a whole new dimension that becomes a part of these complex relationships. They get a lot of physical rewards. They get a lot of neurological rewards from just being in close proximity with people. And as a result, that heightened sense of awareness and appreciation also leads to a greater sense of loss. And so when those relationships fall apart, you're losing multiple components of a relationship that suddenly had become really key to supporting you. You look to it for different types of support. I think that's also something that really happens in adolescence, that all social relationships are really an exchange, and there's a lot of commodification that goes between, what you have, what I give to you. And that becomes more complex in adolescence. And as a result, when you lose a relationship, when it breaks up, you lose multiple dimensions of something that was once important to you. And I think that creates a huge sense of loss. And I think the other component that really is amplified, and some of this is definitely due to adolescents' increased sensitivity to social cues and to social contexts, is that it also creates an increased vulnerability. And so when you lose a relationship, you're suddenly losing a whole lot more. The last thing that I was going to say is I think also there's a dimension that I've been thinking a lot about based on what young people have been saying, is that there's also a lot of artifacts of relationships that exist now that didn't exist even 20 years ago. So when you go through a breakup, you have a lot more evidence that relationship once existed. So moving away from that relationship can become really difficult to extract yourself from, and has really significant implications.
That's a really good point, right? And it's also more public with what you post on media and things like that. And also kind of along the lines of what you were saying, is that there's maybe a loss of part of our identity, right? If you were so-and-so's partner and now that is no longer, that part of your identity shifted, or at least is going to reemerge in a different form. So you're absolutely right. Thank you. And Nicole, you get to visit with a lot of students who may be experiencing exactly what Anna described, maybe as they move into college and meet, of course, many new people. What kinds of relationship issues bring students to counseling?
Great question. And you're right. Like, I deal mostly with late adolescence, early adulthood, which is just this really interesting time where the primary task is really about this autonomy and intimacy mixed together, being independence with others, being both independent but in dependence with others. So I think a lot of things that come up are really about navigating boundaries, what's healthy, what's not healthy, really learning how to understand who they are, what their needs are, and be in relationship, what's healthy to compromise on, how many chances should I give someone. They're navigating vulnerability versus can I get this right so I can avoid pain. A lot of questions around early in their life, they have all these templates around what was good relationships, what were challenging relationships. And so sometimes it's not necessarily, familiarity can feel like love because it feels familiar. So a lot of folks are just trying to tease apart who am I in this relationship? How do I keep myself, but then incorporate others in my life? And then the thing you spoke to, I think it's just the sheer, what brings people into counseling is just the sheer distress around all of this. You know, when people start to stop being able to function like they normally function, or they give all of their time to the relationship and other parts of their life suffer, or when they're breaking up or things are not going well, how far do I go to keep this? And how much of myself do I change? So it's really about this solidification of self. And unfortunately, we also see on our end, especially with counseling, all the unhealthy dynamics and unhealthy relationships that get played out. Unfortunately, things around intimate partner violence and sexual violence will start to emerge. They're less than protected relationships. So they're kind of out there on their own and just learning to navigate, speaking their truth, tolerating conflict, living, again, in relationship with others, but also at the same time trying to figure out who they are. And, trying to do it all in social media and on text because folks have a hard time really talking to each other. So those are some of the things that I see show up, and it's the gamut from like, I really want to understand me all the way to I know I'm in an unhealthy relationship and I can't get out.
Yeah, that disentanglement is, and like you're saying, that maybe the conversation isn't a conversation, it's information out, but because it happens through social media, the dialogue may not be.
Yeah, or folks just they struggle to be able to say it they want to text it, they want to email it, they want to navigate relationships and intimacy because it's less of a threat than being in person with someone and learning to tell truth and through real communication.
Yeah, exactly. And what's the role of we'll talk about different spaces, but maybe peers in helping navigate these relationships and helping manage the emotional aspects of their friend is undergoing this, and what kind of I don't know, Michaela, maybe you can offer some thoughts on how peers help them manage the relationships of their friends.
Yeah, so just from personal experience, I found that I can really rely on my peer groups and close friends to kind of like help me navigate difficult situations. I'm a person, I like to take things on my own, and that has kind of like encouraged me, like Dr. Green mentioned, getting into counseling because I need kind of like that unbiased, less judgmental space where I can just like trauma dump where it's allowed. And a lot of people I found with setting boundaries, you have to set boundaries with yourself and with others. So like some people honestly are not good with certain things. So I try not to go to my friends for a lot of things, surprisingly. And I've tried to invest in like my therapy space and my emotional wellness space once a week. Like Dr. Green mentioned, like setting boundaries is really important. I've used a lot of self-help books. I haven't found the perfect one, but I have this new book called Set Boundaries by Dr. Nadra Glover, and I am in love with it. It really unpacks how you can set boundaries with, your current family members and even your future children that you may or may not have, and like breaking that generational trauma of continuing like unhealthy coping mechanisms, and it kind of like helps me prepare. And I also like this other book called Today I Affirm by Alexandra L. And that is another self-help book that has helped me kind of like navigate through loss, while also like managing emotional relationships and emotional aspects of just life. I found that I really am attached to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I took a class on death, dying, and bereavement. And I found that going through a breakup myself and just other losses, I really been able to go through like the 5 stages of grief in her book. So denial, anger, bargaining, hope, and acceptance. And it may not have perfectly fit under like the specific definitions of those words, but I've kind of like went through the process of that. I also really, since I'm in human development, like I'm studying a bunch of things that are just going on in my mind, I've also just felt really connected to William Worden's like model of grief. And the acronym is TEAR. So like T is accepting the reality of the loss. And like that piece is like more associated with denial, which is like the biggest piece to overcome. And then you also have like E, which is experiencing the pain of the loss, which has really like been hard for me. It's really hard for me to be vulnerable. And I think that like due to my identities as like a Black woman, I have to kind of like be this strong figure. And I've just been trying to like unpack that in counseling. I also want to talk about like the adjustment of life, that letter A, without the person. And that really relates to like grief. Like mentioned on the panel, like losing your partner, and I have had a partner that's been in my life for 7 years.
Wow.
If ever broke up, it, you know, or like officially like cut it off, it will be really difficult for me to navigate that because they've been here through like the milestones, the loss of my mom, you know, high school graduation, college graduation, and just other big parts of my life. And then also like reinvesting in a new reality is so difficult, especially it's like, you know, taking that leap of faith is hard. And especially with engaging in new connections, when you've kind of like dissected and been through like connections where it was unhealthy or unsafe, it's really hard to like move forward and put that trust elsewhere. So that's just something I realized in my internet work and then in myself that is happening amongst my peers.
Wow, that was, you have such a sophisticated way of thinking about this. And you are exactly right that all of those elements come together to maybe say it's a harder pain to do the breaking up, because it's not just about the loss of that person. It's about thinking about yourself. And I was really struck by what you said, that you found that maybe going to peers isn't the best source of support. And I'd love to hear more about how you know that. Is it that the advice you're getting isn't so great, or because you've seen their own patterns and habits?
Yeah, so a lot of my friends, you know, we're a work in progress, we're growing. And I found that a lot of like my friends, they're navigating their own things. So I don't like want to put more things onto them. But I've also found like within myself throughout other relationships, I haven't been equipped enough to help them through certain things. And I just imagine, you know, how it would feel if I was on the other like side of that and I needed the help. So I try to get more professional help, learn those skills in counseling, and then I try to practice those in my relationships. So it's like we're all learning together, but I do tend to like rely on adults more. I find that my friends, I am friends with older people, they are a little bit more wiser, but they've also, I feel like there's just in my circumstances, they haven't really reached the intensity of the relationship. Like they've been more healthier to leave or choose a different route than I picked. So it's harder for them to talk about like the issues that I experienced, because they were like, oh, I have not tolerated that, or oh, I would have been left. So it's just difficult. I think that it honestly is associated with shame with me. Like I'm just shameful that I decided to tolerate certain things, and embarrassed about it. So I tend to go to like that therapy space where it's like they could judge me, or they could, you know, kind of talk to me about things, but it's not really that friendship where like you do have like outward judgment. But I do accept it. I'm growing and I'm deciding to take constructive criticism from my peers. So that's just something that I'm working on.
I think that's a really good point, that with peers and loved ones or siblings or parents or, you know, other caregivers, because they love you, they want to help protect you. So it may come off or feel like judgment to say, why don't you just break up with that person, right? That person isn't good for you or something. And so that's a really interesting observation, that the counseling space may give some distance to that.
I just wanted to validate that that's something that we hear a lot, you know, as people ask, because our counseling services are so impacted. And a lot of that is because when we've attempted to help establish peer spaces, the reluctance to like, you know, trust that a peer is going to know really how to help you, to tell the truth to the peer, and without with the fear of judgment from that peer who you'll see. So these more anonymous / more unbiased, more adult spaces is, I think, some of what's driving the demand for clinical service now and for counseling, because of the difficulty of folks overcoming these barriers of needing to be vulnerable, needing to establish, but also wanting like someone who's got a little bit more insight to really help the students. So there's a pro and the con to the peer. And I know that we find that it's hard to get peer programs off the ground. And a lot of the students share the same feedback.
That's so interesting. So what are some ways that adults or schools, maybe Tomi, you can share your thoughts about this around sexual education or relationship education. What are some ways that schools have been helpful in providing this support and feedback? And just sounding, listening space.
Well, the way that they've been helpful is that I remember the last time I had a sex education, like actual class, was my freshman year in high school. It's a part of the requirement, at least for the Chicago public school system. But what I've heard from other peers from other schools, most of the time is taught by your gym teacher or your PE teacher. And it's more taught in a way of, rather than also focusing on the mental health and well-being of the adolescents, it's more of just biological and focused on the anatomy and sexual health, and making sure that you're using a condom and that you know what different type of STIs are. And although I will say it's helpful to a certain extent, it doesn't really go into like the depth that it's needed, especially in order to navigate through high school, because there's still like some stigmas with STIs and birth control, and some people may not really have the knowledge or information, especially people around my age. So yeah, it's been more of like, it's okay, it's not like the worst, but it can also be better. Like, I do believe that they can focus more on the mental health part. They can talk more about consent. Also, like with in same-sex relationships too, they don't really have a curriculum about how to navigate through that. So I feel like it's probably, from what I heard, like especially my parents' generation, is probably a bit better, but it can definitely be more improved, I will say.
Yeah, and Anna, you and I have talked about that a lot. Can you have some examples that come to mind of places that really do the holistic, integrated approach of, the biology of sex and sexual relationships should not be divorced from the emotional components of it?
Well, I just want to say, I know we have some curriculum designers here in our audience who are doing really good work to try to change this so that sex ed is better. And I do think that we have some real policy barriers that, adolescents in so many domains are just, it's about their genitals. Like, they have control over their genitals and nothing else. And so we just really try to help them protect those. And we don't really think about sort of how they are in context in the broader sense. And so I think that, I do think that there's been a really big boom on looking at social emotional relationships more broadly and how we give young people skills to be able to navigate those successfully. And I think it's probably, we've talked about sexual socialization, that it's something that starts in infancy, that you start being socialized as a sexual person. I think that we can do better about socializing us to be social people. And unfortunately, I think that also during the pandemic, we've faced incredible challenges that young people have been really isolated. They've lost a lot of their capacity to build skills and practice having social relationships, navigating the complexity of them, building friendships, having them fall apart. It's become, I think that we have an incredible need right now to attend to this, because I think that young people we know are struggling. It's very clear that their mental health is struggling. And I think that part of it is their anxiety. Even there's been amplified social anxiety because of the fact that we've kept them apart so much. And so I think that we need to be really thoughtful about how we want to integrate that into learning. And I think I wanted to go back to something that Michaela said about accessing peers. I think one of the challenges is we have to sometimes make the decision of, do we want to learn alongside somebody, or do we want to get mentorship from somebody who knows more than us? And there's times where we need to make different decisions. And I think all too often we leave young people to learn alongside their peers the complexity of these social relationships without giving them adequate scaffolding to do it in a really successful way.
And do you think it's because we may feel ill-equipped to help them feel better, right? That's what, if we want, we can't solve the problem. The breakup happened and now we can't make it not unhappen, or, it's better that they broke up. So how do we navigate that space?
So this is, I think that, I love, Michaela, you said like people my age were kind of a mess socially. I'll tell you, people my age are also a mess socially. So
you're right.
I think it is something that we haven't well figured, we haven't figured out ways to really always help people. I think that there's one thing that if people are seeking help, if they've identified that they need therapeutic support, that's really wonderful. But I think there's a lot of people who are in that area sort of in between, that they're kind of struggling along and they don't even see the need for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so just thinking about what are the ways that we can be disseminating information more effectively about effective social relationships, about how do we get that out to the general public. And I think that is a really interesting thing. Like, how do we, when we look at media, when we look at messaging that's going out, how do we make it accessible so that all people, I don't think this is just a problem for young people, have models of positive relationships. And also, I think that the importance in that is also making sure that they're culturally and contextually adaptive, because what looks like a healthy relationship to one person may not look that way to another person. And so making sure that we are able to do that in a way that's responsive is really complex, but I think it's where we need to go.
Yeah, I agree. And we have an expert here. So Dr. Green, what are some ways that we can support? And I'll have some other questions about what we can learn from relationships. So what are ways to support people undergoing a breakup?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that's what the struggle is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, to support someone who's going through a breakup, I think the tendency is to want, as to your point,
Mm-hmm.
to make it go away, to fix the
Mm-hmm.
problem, or that there's something wrong with a bad feeling, or living through the process and tolerating and learning to understand your own grief process. There's like good learning there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the one thing is that, and what I often see people try to do is like, well, let me tell you what happened to me.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but when you go to someone and they tell you your problem and they want to talk about their problem, it's kind of not that, it's not that fun, So I think validating where the person is and saying, I see you, can I better understand what you're going through? And letting the person talk, number one. Letting, not you trying to check, is the person who's trying to help the person check your difficult time tolerating someone else's feeling of vulnerability, because you can't fix it or help them.
Yeah.
And just trusting that being there is helpful, being there in the process and leaning in is helpful. I think so. Validating what the person is saying, being there to say, I see and feel what you're saying. You can ask that person what would be helpful. Do you want to problem solve, or you just want me to hear you?
Mm-hmm.
If you're unclear, like what's needed, they might say, I don't know what I need. I'm just in a lot of pain. And then you just say, okay, that's okay. We'll try a lot of things.
Yeah.
But the idea of really metaphorically and maybe even physically to Anna's point, like holding their hand through the process, because I think when we get into like, there's a way that you could have prevented this, or there's a way you should have known, or there's a way to do this perfectly, which is what a lot of messages of the adolescents get, a lot of this messaging. I'm going to try to avoid all the landmines. They don't take the value of like, I messed up. It's okay.
Right.
Like, it's okay it's okay for me to forgive myself for not knowing.
Right. And it's not helpful to say, I told you he was terrible, from the
like it's okay to say like, you had to learn on your own. It's okay to say, to help the person forgive themselves for not knowing. They're young. How could they have known? And I think that's where folks get tripped up, is that they think they should have known, they think they should have done, they think they want a Monday morning quarterback, a process they were in. And just learning to tolerate that you are okay is really the real lesson. In all of it.
Tomi and Michaela, does this resonate? Is this helpful to hear from an adult? Not in particular from Dr. Green, but if you are in this situation.
Yeah, kind of to reiterate what was mentioned in the conversation, I feel like the adults that I've went to or people I confide in, they kind of have like this Band-Aid effect. They want to, I'm hurting, they want to put a band on it and fix me, make me better. And that's not always the best decision.
Yeah.
That's not what I really want. I
Mhm.
found that, like Dr. Green said, I do want to just have a space to talk, a space to problem solve and kind of analyze what could I have done next time when I'm in this space so I don't feel regretful.
Yeah.
I really find that it's more the aftercare that is something I really need help with. I like to do things alone and then rely on my peers and other adults for the aftermath of it. So I found that celebrating myself and focusing on joy is just really important to me. And
Yes.
when I rely on my friends, they're like, okay, let's just go out to dinner. Let's fill that time in and try to fill the void, not in a way to fix you, but to kind of keep you occupied
Right.
and show you that you're not saying explicitly like you're better off, but
Right.
showing me the experiences I might have missed out on while being in a relationship or being in an unsafe space.
Right. There's still a support system, whether it's the person you just left or it's, obviously
And
not.
people still love you and there's still
Right.
love around you.
Right.
I think those are the important messages that I think people can just demonstrate
Mhm.
is that we still love you regardless. And we're going to help you understand like how all this went down and make you stronger, more insightful for it.
Tomi?
Yeah, I just agree with everything Michaela and Dr. Green said. I would also like to add on to earlier what Dr. Green said. It sounded like with active listening, basically, just being there for someone, not trying to make it about yourself, like actually listening to listen and not just listening to respond. I believe that's very important, especially dealing with being in high school. Like, of course, I've had my fair share of friends who've come to me about their relationship problems. And what I realized, especially at the end of the day, is that they're in control to do what they want to do. And you just have to be a safe space for them. And if they come to you, that's amazing. If they go to someone else, that's also good. I would also like to say that I've read somewhere with how it's really important because a lot of the people that we tend to go to help with our relationship problems may also have relationship problems, and they don't have all the advice and answers that they can give. Even if you're going to your parents or your teachers or even your other friends, they all might have their own relationship problems similar to you. So the people that you may want to go to advice to, they're still trying to figure out life themselves,
That's
which
right.
is why I advocate for going to a professional, going to an unbiased person. Definitely, of course, asking your friends and peers as well. But I agree with Michaela. It's probably better to go to a professional who is in that field of helping you with those relationship dynamics.
Exactly. And as you're saying, they may not have it figured out. They also have their own relationship history that they may still be working through and may not provide the best advice or can support in other ways, such as taking you to dinner, going on a hike, doing other things that will be fulfilling if not giving direct advice. So we've circled a little bit around the question of what we can learn from relationships, not just how to support and move from them and move forward, but what does that mean to learn from a relationship breakup?
I think I was just going to offer, because I really love this idea. I think one of the things that we need to recognize is the significance of these relationships. I think very often adolescent relationships are minimized, that, oh, they're not important. They're not good, these sort of seminal events that young people are experiencing. And so embracing them is really important. And I think that the other part with breakups, and I love that Michaela sort of brings us to the stages of grief. And one of the things that I really loved that the person who conceptualized that actually conceptualized those stages for the person who was dying, not for the survivors.
Oh, wow.
And what I think is really interesting is when we think about it in the context of relationships, we're both dying. We're both losing whoever was involved in the relationship. Both of them are experiencing that significant loss. So it's actually a really beautiful application. And it reminds me a lot of a hospice faculty member that I once met, who was teaching young people, teaching students on how to be compassionate with people who are dying. And one of the things he said is that rather than coming to that and saying, oh, and having this very like heavy feeling of loss. It's, like, what is the opportunity here? And so I really think that as we think about embracing young people and supporting them through these transitions, of finding that moment of, and it doesn't always feel that way. Like there may be moments where you just are sitting with or holding their hand or being with them in that heavy space, but also really holding that place of like whatever the uplifting part is. And I think that being really intentional about that and supporting young people and recognizing that for themselves, that even in the moment of despair, there's some opportunity for learning, and there's some opportunity of taking away, there's something that you're coming out of this with. And that doesn't minimize sitting in the pain of where you're at, because I think that's also really important. But to recognize that there is an upward piece is important.
And also there's a piece of, you did it. I mean, you have been through a breakup, right? Because breakups don't happen just suddenly with no warning, right? There is a feeling building up and an avoidance that many of us experience, avoiding this painful moment. And then when it happens, it is very painful, but there's this sense of, well, that was horrible, but we got through the point where it seemed we were going anyway, right? So maybe there's something about that. But thank you, Anna. I think that's you always offer such great insights, things I think I know, and then you say something that I didn't know that. But what about the others on the panel? What other opportunities?
I think I can just add, I think that, I mean, for me as a psychologist, I think working with a lot of folks, the thing that I think people learn is more about themselves. Why did I choose this person? When did I really know? And what did I not let myself know? If I let myself know, what would I have known? Like all those conversations with yourself. And all of the deep work of like, whether it's through journaling or prayer or meditation or yoga or finding time with friends, what do I learn about who I'm attracted to in the world? Who's attracted to me in the world? Where did that come from? Why did that feel like love when it wasn't really love, or maybe it was or wasn't. And then I think, because I think especially in social media, it can feel like the other person just moved on because that's their fake life or whatever. So it can feel like you're so unimportant, like you could just move on from me, that you've the feeling of insignificance. What makes me feel significant? Who makes me feel significant? So there's like all this learning and rich like understanding of, I kind of feel like we walk in the world and the person who kind of matches our issues, like we'll walk past 1,000 people, and the people that have that match us are like ding 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 ding. Like, and you got to figure out like why and who and what's that about, and is that really love? So I think what folks really want to understand, especially in adolescence, especially in later adolescence, is what is all of that, and how do I want to move forward being intentional in relationships, and how do I want to move past some of these patterns? And if you really ask folks, they usually knew. And they knew more than they let themselves know. And they avoided knowing it. And there's all these ways they avoided it. And there's like all this digging to tell the truth around. So there's like all this, to Anna's point, like great opportunity to just really get in there with yourself.
And that's a process, right? That's not going to happen the day after you break up. And that's, I think, that's the challenge, right? That some of the healing may come from the reflection and the thinking about the patterns and all that. But that's certainly, most of us, I think, are not ready to face that head on. Maybe painful in a different way immediately after. And so in that space of in between, that's a challenging time to sit with it. Michaela, sorry, were you going to say something? I think I might have cut you off.
No, you didn't cut me off, but as I'm listening, all I can think about is intentional thinking and just like my process of dealing with relationships. And I feel like it was a way for me to like emotionally hoard and to have things like, oh, like, well, I have a partner. Oh, I have a best friend. Oh, I'm not lonely. And it kind of was a distraction from reality for me. In my own intentional thinking, I, like Dr. Green said, I thought of like, why was I encountered this relationship? What stage of life was I in when I was in this relationship, or when it started? Where am I now? And I feel like I just do a lot of just inner thinking when I go through loss or go through growing apart from somebody. Just circling back in the conversation, I know we talked about like not going to our friends, not going to certain people for our emotional support after a breakup. And I kind of feel like there's certain people in your life and you're like, oh, I'm definitely not gonna take advice from you. And I feel like that's something I go through. And I was like thinking about the other day, I was like, a lot of people I want to go to for advice do not model the healthy skills that I want to pick up on.
Right.
And that's why I may not be going back to.
And you still love that person. You still cherish the friendship, just not for this.
Not for this. And sometimes I go through like this phase and like counseling, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, are we a good match? Like, because I don't like hearing it. I just honestly emotionally going back to the emotional hoarding. I want to just hang on to stuff. I want to be in denial. I don't want to know the truth. I don't want to grow. And I think going through a breakup, when I encountered it, it just was like this thing that was bound to happen. I should have executed those skills that I was learning in counseling. I was learning throughout my journey, and I just didn't want to. So maybe if this person is not meant for me at this time now, maybe later, once I develop those skills and focus on self-joy, self-care, self-love, maybe we can pick this back up. But right now, it's just not serving me. So I think that's something I just have to learn throughout life, like to let go of things that are not serving you. And if you feel like you need them later in life, definitely pick it back up. But I think that
I love that term, emotional hoarding. I'd never heard of that before. Is that your term, or is this well known?
I just made it up on the spot. That's just how I just feel like I'm just holding on to these things. I don't want to let it go. And
because it's similar to, I think, hoarding other stuff. There's some physical attachment that feels comforting. So that emotion feels comforting for whatever reason. And then you can see Nicole to figure out why that emotion feels comfortable in that moment, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just wanted to piggyback on something that I think is so important that you said, Michaela, is just also recognizing that therapeutic relationships are also social relationships. And so it's not just somebody having a degree or a title that makes them the right fit as being a person to give you advice on this. It really is a goodness of fit, thing. And so I think that is so important. And to as we think when we educate young people about where to go for emotional support, we often say, like, you have your peers, you have trusted adults, but really helping young people build their capacity and flex that muscle to build strong social relationships with anybody that they're seeking help from is really important, particularly during this, like if they're experiencing a stress like a breakup.
Yeah. And to revisit, like you're saying, on it, to revisit whether that relationship is working for you, and whatever the relationship is, including the therapist.
Yeah.
I just want to remind folks in the audience to ask us any questions if you have them, because we are have time for that as well.
As we're waiting for questions to come in, I also just had a really interesting, I think that one of the things that we can learn a lot from breakups is this idea about like, what is love and what is desire and how are they different? Because I think that definitely in adolescence, as we're learning to navigate these relationships for the first time, those things become very conflated, that we're thinking, okay, like we confuse love with desire. And I think we also confuse sometimes love and desire with being loved and desired. And so we don't always understand that difference. And so thinking about that too, about I was just talking with a young friend earlier when she was talking about breaking up with her boyfriend. And she said, I didn't really know the difference between loving somebody and loving somebody loving me. And I think that can often be a really important part of breakups, is helping clarify, like, what was the transaction that I was getting from that relationship? What was useful and what wasn't?
That's right. Tomi, did you want to add to this?
Yeah. I want to say, like, what Anna just said really clicked with me, with currently what my class is working on in AP Literature. And we're reading the play Othello, and we're like analyzing it and stuff. And we were just watching a documentary on it. And a good part that was brought up was like the relationship between Othello, the main character, and his wife Desdemona, and about how was it really necessarily love, or was it just fascination and desire? And because that led to Othello killing Desdemona. So it was really interesting to see. At first we were thinking like, oh, he absolutely loved her, they loved each other, but was it more of just fascination of a new thing, since that type of play was dealing with a first love and like the adventures of a first love. So I think that also resonates a lot with adolescence too, because a lot of the times we are in our first relationships, whether it's like through high school or even college or even elementary school, we're going through those first loves. And is it more of like desire that we just love the fact that there's for the first time someone having a crush on us or someone loving us, or is it that we actually feel a connection and an emotional healthy connection with this person? So I think it's just something to really think about, and it like leads to with long-term relationships as well, with your first love and that being a long-term relationship. Some people leave those feeling like they don't really know who they are. Like for people who've had the same partner all throughout high school and college, when they're leaving that and they break up with that person, they start to wonder like, who was I, or did I really waste all of my years, or who am I going to be without this person? And that leads to them jumping into another relationship. So also learning, a big part of learning with that as well, like with learning who your identity is, I think those type of people, they really, really need to learn who they are as a person and go on a self-discovery before jumping into another relationship.
And all of that is part of the self-discovery, right? Whether it was really love or love to be loved, all of that is part of our understanding of who we are and what we need. So the relationship is valuable no matter how it ends up. I think, you know what I mean, within reason, that you learn something from each relationship.
I think, can I just add, I love, Tommy, that you mentioned that, because I think that what it also highlights is the need to honor the time of the breakup, because that is just as important as the relationship itself. And I think that we see very often that if you don't honor that time, I always think about it when I was an adolescent, I used to call people either I's or we's. So my friends that were really independent were I's, and my friends that were really like codependent and always in a relationship were we's. And I had some friends who were we's, like they were always in a relationship, like before they even got out of the next one, they were, into the next, they were moving from one to another. And I look at how that has perpetuated, and that pattern perpetuates often throughout their lives. And so I think that really creating time and honoring, like if we could celebrate breakups just as much as we celebrate the relationships, if we could find a way to really embrace those and recognize learning, I think that that would create so much opportunity, because it would also, we have to create a big culture shift, I guess, of just like, how do you celebrate, how do you post when you, and it's not when you blow up a relationship, because I think sometimes that's what we celebrate, when somebody's like, bam, like I'm out, I hate this person, but really just this like, wow, it's over. And that moment of silence is really what we need to embrace.
Exactly. And it is kind of surprising that we even need a culture shift around it, because we've all been through these experiences before. So why is it a surprise, or why is it challenging? But along that line, we have a question. As a parent, how could I best support my son through a breakup? Nicole, do you want to offer some words of wisdom?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, as a parent, it's hard to see your child suffer. But the task of development, to just recognize a bad feeling doesn't mean that they're gonna fully like decompensate or not be constituted. So I think checking in on them, validating what they're feeling, that this is a breakup, just reminding them that they will get through it. I think as long as, they're really focused on the task of taking care of themselves through it, like teaching them how to, it's almost like teaching the fish, teaching to fish as opposed to giving the fish, teaching them how to tolerate their feelings, how to persist through things. And then if you're noticing real signs that are like persisting longer than a few weeks, and they're really not able to eat, they're really not able to sleep, they're really not able to do the tasks, then really engaging in maybe more assertive behaviors, like, do you need professional help, or can I support you more? A lot of times, especially in adolescence, folks don't want to open up all the way, particularly to a parent. So who can I connect you with that you'll be willing to talk to? Another family member, trusted family friend, what have you, that might help them through the process. And for you to be watching and really encouraging, but letting them go through their process if they can, and using all these other tools, because as I said, it is a good learning, but then watching to see if they're not able to recover, and then intervening when necessary around those things. I don't know if others have other thoughts.
Yeah. When I think of just an isolated experience I went through, my grandmother kind of like nursed me back to health in a way. I didn't really know how I wanted to be helped, but through the different methods that she used, like I think we were attached to the hip for a while, and I kind of had to learn how to, we use the fish metaphor, like swim on my own. But I really had to be taught in different ways, and kind of nursed. And at the time, I was entering my first year of college, and I was 18, and I kind of was independent for most of my high school career. I kind of had to go back to that youth, like younger age stage, when I was a younger child, and kind of like go through that all over again. And kind of, I had to like break myself down and accept the help. But I didn't initially come around. And like Dr. Green said, I didn't really want help. I didn't really want to open up. But once it became chronic and it impacted my body, I was like, okay. So I think really giving us time, giving us autonomy and the things that we want, trying different things. At the time, I did get back into mental health counseling. I didn't want to, but we both discussed it. It was a lot of dinner time, like table talks that lasted for hours that happened. There were some times when I just was in bed, I was bedbound, I didn't want to get up. It was just a really difficult experience. But I was able to break through, but it just took a lot of time. So I think applying pressure, but not putting too much pressure on us to open up, to get better, and just giving us time to like break through that cocoon, it really did help me. And there, to be honest, there isn't really a true way to help somebody, but just by being there and, just standing by my side, my grandmother really impacted me. And I was honestly nursed back to health. So that's just
She sounds like a very special person who knew exactly how to help.
She has superpowers. She definitely does. I don't know how I made it through.
She does. So we have one last question about a relationship that's occurred virtually. Is it the same grieving process? My guess is yes, but I'm not the expert here on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the expert, but I've definitely seen people grieving virtual or remote relationships as profoundly as in-person relationships, because sometimes those remote or virtual ones, there's a lot more dialogue and vulnerability that happens, and sharing sometimes, because that's really it's not like you're going to the movies together or things like that. And so missing the regularity of it, and a lot of times feeling maybe duped or ghosted, those feelings of feeling or just the anonymity of it can also be profoundly painful in a particular way. That's been my anecdotal experience, that they can be equally as painful, and in a lot of ways even more vulnerable or more sharing that's happened, because it's largely been text or remote communication in some way.
Yeah, so it sounds like the message is that a breakup is a breakup is a breakup, right? It's a loss that is experienced and shifts the day-to-day feelings and experiences that someone has.
I think the other thing that's really important in that, and Nicole, I think you touched on this, is this idea of, in all relationships, we sort of project parts of ourselves onto it and interpret it in we interpret behavior and language in certain ways. And in virtual relationships, I think that's really amplified. So you're actually having a lot of the relationship with yourself, and there is a lot more disclosure. Like there's this anonymity that occurs because people it feels very private. And in fact, it amplifies this feeling of vulnerability, because suddenly people, like when you lose it, you're losing the part of yourself that you were projecting onto this. And so you also then are sort of going through the breakup alone, which I think is really different. And so I think that I agree that sometimes it can be even more significant than an in-person relationship. And you also, I think the other interesting thing is that it completely removes a lot of the physical part of relationships, romantic relationships, which can be both a source of like pleasure and tension. And so it really shifts the dynamic of what that intimacy is about.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, so I see a question about LGBTQIA plus relationships. And I think that, I identify as a queer person, and my grandmother is the total opposite of me, very traditional in her modes of living. And I'm just totally different. But what really helped me navigate, the isolation and breakup of, my LGBTQ plus relationship in high school. I honestly did not tell her the depth of it. I didn't really want to get into that, but what she did was, before I needed to talk about a breakup or talk about isolation or things that were kind of like taboo for her to talk about, was that she set the environment and safe space before I actually needed that safe space. So that is something that I found that was really helpful. Honesty, transparency. She always let me know that she was here. She may not understand it, she may not get it, but she can be open-minded and kind of like help me navigate it, even though it doesn't align with her specific way that she wants to live. So we
Again, I love your grandma. This woman is amazing. That's so
she's
special.
pretty cool.
She's super cool. That's great. Okay, well, I think we are at time, and I promised all of you, I know you're all super busy, that we would jump off at noon, but I have loved this conversation so much, and I think it's so important, and each of you offered such unique insights that we're very grateful. And Megan, I think has posted or shared, this will be posted on the Center for the Developing Adolescent website for those of you who want to visit it again. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.